Today's topic is going to be how to perform the crow press to handstand. I think it's a great introductory bent arm press handstand that you can do. It's not super technical. It doesn't require too much flexibility. There's a little bit of strength involved, a little bit of balance, a little bit of technique, but it is a very accessible movement. How long it takes you to learn really depends on your level of strength and control. So personally, this is the first entry to handstand that I've ever learned, but I was able to do it because I already had a bit of strength built up. If the strength is a factor, it just might take you a little bit longer to build up the actual shoulder power to be able to do it. That being said, there's a progression for it. As always, this is not the best universal ultimate technique. This is just the way that I prefer to practice and teach the move. So hopefully you get some suggestions and concepts that you can apply to your practice. Other than that, let's get into it. So before you start the training, make sure your shoulders and wrists are warmed up. It is a hand-arm balance movement, so you want to make sure that everything is good to go. And then before we get into it too much, this is the shoulder position that's going to be very important to learn for the press-up and maintaining tension. So you want your shoulders depressed and then protracted. This is something that you want to practice because it's where, what I've noticed, it's where a lot of people lose that connection during the press. They lose the shoulder position and then it becomes difficult to follow through, or they lose the tension and they fall. So practice it right now, but also practice it when you're not training depressed. And you can do that with bent arms as well, because that's kind of where you're going to be. But shoulders down, shoulders forward. I want to feel my pecs and my lats engaged. There's a lot more than that, but I want to feel that muscle tension, because that, it may not necessarily look 100% like that when you're doing the actual move, but that's the intention that you want to have. Depression, protraction. Keep that in mind for the future exercises that we're doing. So step one is going to be understanding the mechanics of the crow or the frog stand. I've heard it called different names. Crow is typically, I think, what they call it in yoga. Frog stand maybe more in gymnastics. I don't think it resembles either a frog or a crow, so if you have a better name, feel free to let me know. But so I teach this move in a very specific way, and the reason is that, number one, it's efficiency. It's the most efficient way to stack the body, to use the least amount of energy, and I think it's also a better coordination and tension involved for pressing. So the crow, very simple. Arms shoulder width, a little bit wider is okay, but don't go too much wider. Elbows slightly bent. Lean forward, and then the knees are going to go on top of the elbows. And before you start to shift weight into the hands, try to really coordinate that shoulder position I was talking about. Depressed, protracted, especially protracted. Try to round your back. That doesn't necessarily mean that your back is going to be round when you do the movement. It's not going to look the same for everyone, but the intention versus the manifestation is important. So I'm intending to be as round as possible, even if that's not what's manifesting. So hands down, elbows bent just a little bit. Knees, so here's what I'm going to do with the knee placement. I'm going to get a little bit closer to the camera. It's not going to be the same for everyone. This is my personal preference, because what happens is the elbow creates a shelf. I can rest the knee on top of that shelf, and then when I do this, I don't have to hold up my own legs, which means less energy. So this right here, the sharp part of the elbow into the tricep tendon, I'm going to try to put this, try to see if I'm in camera, right here. So the space between my VMO and the kneecap, I'm going to try to connect those two. I'm going to put the leg directly on top of the elbow, because when I do this right, remember shoulder position, knees, I lean the shoulders forward, I lean the weight into the hands, the feet get lighter. The feet are very, very light. When I lift my legs, I'm not actually holding up my own legs. My elbow is acting as a table, as a shelf, and my knees can rest on top of it, and then it provides a nice, easy stack for the body. Keep the push from the shoulders, but everything else is pretty relaxed, and what happens is my forearm is vertical, the leg is on top of that, the head and the hip are counterbalancing each other. Very easy position to hold for a long time. Slowly, with control. Everything should be done with control when you're working balance. Just hang out there, get used to this position. If you're not there yet, you can do with a foot support, and just do these light taps. But remember, everything is done slow, controlled, no sudden moves. The first thing you're going to want to do if you want to press from the frog stand is, of course, be able to do the frog stand. And not just be able to do it, but be able to do it well, because it's going to get more difficult as we go on. So how competent do you want to be in the frog stand? If I had to give time, I'd say maybe 20-30 seconds. If you can hold it that long, you're probably comfortable enough to start adding more to it. Two things that you don't want to do as far as mistakes, because this is going to definitely hinder you in the actual press to handstand. So one mistake people make is where they place their legs. I wouldn't call that a mistake, it just makes it more difficult. So if my legs are outside of the body, they're sliding down. I have to lift them up, and that just takes more energy. Legs in the armpits, I see this sometimes. What that does, so when you press, you're actually going to have to press from further, because your legs have to go out before you open up your body. I'll explain that a little bit more later. But when you do or knees into the armpits or high on the triceps, it's not as good of a resting position as what I showed you, the knees on top of the elbows, but also it's actually going to make the press more difficult, depending on how you do it. But the way that I'm teaching you it is going to be more difficult. And then the other mistake, very common, is elbows too bent, my head too close to the floor. It makes the leverage a little bit more difficult when I press. So I like to keep the elbows just a little bit bent, more than 90 degrees. Something like that. I don't know the exact angle. It's not going to be the same for everyone, but you do want your head a little bit high in the frog stand rather than low. So try not to bend your elbows too much. And then, of course, very important, probably the most important, is the shoulder position. If you allow your chest to open, your shoulders to retract, you're going to lose a lot of that tension and that structure that's holding you up. So once you get here, it's very difficult, even in the frog stand. Like, I'm so used to doing it this way, it's hard to do it the other way. But if you start to open, you're not going to be able to maintain the tension. Not only is it going to make the frog stand a lot harder for you, it's going to make the press out of it way harder than it needs to be. So keep that in mind. Elbows slightly bent, knees on top of the elbows, shoulders depressed and protracted. Okay, so assuming you're very comfortable with the frog stand, the next step is to add a bit of strength, add a bit of power, and start to lift the legs. So this is just the iso lift. There's going to be two phases to this. The first is just try to make your knees lighter. So I'm here, my knees are heavy because my elbows are holding all of the weight. So I'm going to initiate by pushing this way, straight up through the palm, but it's going to be an isometric push, and what's going to happen is I'm using that to start to lift my legs. So the actual lift, it's going to look like that. So what happens when I lift is there's a lot more tension in my shoulders because I have to compensate for the legs not being held up by my elbows. And as I do this, I'm extending a little bit from the spine, but in the beginning, don't worry about it too much. What I would suggest is go here and then just try to make your knees lighter by pushing in the shoulders. And even if I still maintain that contact, even if I don't completely have a lift off, my knees got lighter, my shoulders got heavier, so even in doing that, I'm building up the strength and control. But what you want this to look like is a controlled lift. So from here, push down, lift, and what happens when I do this is my shoulders stay in the same place. So notice how I didn't go into a handstand push-up. We don't want this to be a handstand push-up. It is a bent arm press, but it's not a push-up. So it's like, basically my elbows are gonna stay almost in the same place. Very little movement, if any movement, while my legs extend, and then later I straighten up. So that's also in any bent arm press variations, you wanna keep that in mind. You don't wanna turn the bent arm press into a push-up. The bent elbows is just enough to increase your leverage, so you wanna find that position. So that's the iso hold, is just getting used to lifting your knees. If you can hold for a few seconds, you're probably good to try to move on to the next step. Okay, once you have your basic lift off, the next step is to add extensions. So if you notice in the last video, my back was still pretty round as I lifted the knees. So next we're gonna get into about a 90-degree knee angle and a straight back. So you're gonna be in kind of an inverted chair position. The shoulders are gonna stay in the same place. It's just starting to extend the body to understand also the tilt, because we're not gonna be completely vertically yet. That's the last step. So it's gonna look like this. Here, lift, extend. So I'm keeping my knees more or less tucked, but I'm trying to find a straight back position. Now this position is a little bit weird, so typically if you have the strength to already hold this, what you can do is actually extend the legs, which is going to be the next step. And basically what you're going to be doing is going into a bent arm handstand position. Now, this is part of the progression. You don't have to be able to do it for that long, because that bent arm position to hold it, which I'm going to show you, is actually more difficult than the frog stand press itself. But typically if you can hold it, it means you probably have enough strength. It means that the strength is probably not why you can't do it. So I'll show you the extension. Hope it's going to be in frame. So here, lift, extend, extend. Like when I do this one, it's almost hard not to go to a full handstand, because that position is much harder to hold. And that's kind of going to be the next step. This is where most of the strength comes in, is being able to hold that bent arm position, at least momentarily. If you can hold it longer than you need to, like if you can hold it for 5 seconds, it's probably longer than your actual frog stand press is going to take, so you're probably stronger than you need. But this is the strength that you want. If you have this strength, the move is going to be a lot simpler to learn. So frog stand, push, lift, extend, practice. Also coming down. Again, if you notice, I didn't go into a handstand push-up. My shoulders stayed in the same place as my body moved around it. So the extension comes from the back and the hips, but the shoulders remain isolated in that bent arm, protracted, depressed position. Once you have the leg extension and that bent arm hold, the next step is going to be to extend all the way to a handstand. So just a quick tip about the shoulder position. So you're here, right? You're in a closed shoulder position. What you want to do to extend the handstand, obviously it depends on your handstand line and what it looks like. You want to go like this. Right? So the shoulders, it's not just the elbows extending, but it's also the shoulders going into flexion and pushing up. And as this happens, you also go into elevation from depression. So this is your frog stand position. When you get up to the handstand, it's going to look something like this. Obviously, depends on what your handstand looks like and how much control you have. Your frog stand press to handstand is not going to look like much if you don't have a handstand to finish it off. As I mentioned, I couldn't really balance a handstand, but I had the strength to do a frog to handstand in my very early days. So what I was able to do was go frog, press up, and then flop around at the top, because I didn't have a handstand. So you do have to work your handstand independently, work your strength independently, and then combine it all. Just keep that in mind. However, you can still work the bent arm positions and maintain your strength, work your handstand separately against the wall. I'm going to stop rambling and go into the move. So with the extension, there's 2 ways that you can do it. I'll show you both. The first way is to extend to a straight body bent arm position like I showed you, and then finish like a handstand push-up. And that's going to look something like this. Ba, ba, ba. So notice I never went down into my push-up. After I had the straight body, I extended and I finished by creating that vertical line and verticalizing my legs and my hips as well. The second way you can do it, it's easier, but it does involve a little bit more control, is to extend the legs and the shoulders at the same time. It's almost like a kip, but it's not really a kip, but you can make the pushing portion easier. However, you do have to have a much better awareness of your handstand, because the movement won't happen as slow and there's more going on at once. So that's going to look, making sure I'm in frame, it's going to look like this. Ba, ba, ba. So see, when I extended my legs, it actually helped me to finish the push-up. However, like I said, you do want to have the full control of your handstand, otherwise you're probably going to start to walk around, lose control of your legs, etc., etc. You could do this next to a wall, hit your handstand, go to the wall, find your balance. That's one way you could do it. My preference is if you just already have your balance developed in the first place. Obviously, easier said than done. One way that you don't want to do this, it's not that you don't want to do it, this is the least efficient way to do it, is to stay in a tuck and extend your shoulders first. That's going to be the most difficult because then your legs are going to be the heaviest since they're on the side where they weigh more. They're on the heel of the palm side. That's going to look something like this. I don't recommend doing it this way because it's much harder and doesn't really give you any added benefit. So like this, lift here, and then like that. Takes more control. You have to be more aware of the tuck position. My preference actually is the second one, where you extend your legs and your shoulders at the same time, because it's the easiest. You can use that little bit of leg momentum to just pop you up there. So I'll show you that one more time before I do too many reps. So my favorite, frog stand, lift, lift, pop. Like that. Get used to popping up, and then we're not really completing the movement here. This is just going up. The next step is to also talk about how to lower down with control. The negative is important too, because if you're doing a press handstand, it's not just pressing up, it should be pressing up and pressing down and finishing in the position you started. The negative to the frog can be a little bit tricky. The way that I'm going to teach you to do it today, it's not the only way to do it, but it's the way that maintains the same mechanics that we've been doing. So from the handstand, what you're going to do is lean forward in the shoulders, bend the arms slightly to find that position, and then from there, once you have that shoulder tension, then you can slowly, there's something behind me, then you can slowly tuck your legs and then find that curl and find the elbows, but you have the resistance of the shoulders to slow things down. So that's gonna look, making sure I'm in frame, so it's gonna look something like this. So I'm in my handstand, I lean, I bend, and then once I have that bend, I can slowly lower my legs down. I think this is the easiest way to do it. The other way to do it would be going into a tuck handstand first, where you go like this with the arms straight and then bend. But for the same reason that I don't like going up like that, it's just unnecessarily harder and it doesn't really look as good. Now, if you're more flexible, it might be easier for you. I'm stronger than I am flexible, especially in regards to handstands. So I try to use that bent arm strength for this particular movement, and that's typically how I teach it as well. But that's the other way that you can do it, is you go into your tuck, curl, lean, and then bend. So you bend last instead of first. Nothing wrong with that either. My preference is the first one. I think it's easier. I think it allows for more control. So once you have that, the whole movement, doing a lot of reps today, you're gonna have frog, lift, whoopa, press, lean, bend, come down, relax, and come out of it. That's the whole movement. So then eventually you have to ask yourself, why can't I do this? Why can't someone do this? What are the reasons? What are the troubleshooting? So typically there's going to be two reasons why someone can't do this move. The first reason that's not going to be covered in this video is you just don't have a solid handstand. You don't have proper balance. That takes time to learn. You can check out my ebook, my courses, my other YouTube videos. But basically, if you're not familiar with holding your handstand and balancing on your hands, it's going to be very difficult to do a press that involves passing through the handstand. Keep that in mind. Now, with that out of the way, the second reason that people probably can't do this is lack of strength. It's not, I wouldn't consider it a strength move, but there is a little bit of strength involved. And if you don't have it, your shoulders might collapse, Shoulders might collapse opposite of strength. It might be technique as well, but basically just getting used to building strength in that bent arm position. So one thing you can do is just hips up, bend, lean forward, do this kind of bent arm isometric hold where you make your toes as light as possible. If you notice, I'm just on the top of my foot. This isometric hold is going to be very useful. Accumulate time there, build up the strength, make sure you're depressed and protracted. Here is no good, I have weight in my feet, but here I lean, my forearm stays vertical, but my shoulders go forward, and I make my feet as light as possible. If I can lift, if I can tap, even better. Just building strength in that position. Another move that you can do is pike push-ups. That's helpful for handstand push-ups, but it's helpful for this as well. What I would include, if you're doing it for this kind of bent arm press, is an isometric hold at the position that we're going to be lifting in. So a typical pike push-up looks something like that. So what I would do is the same thing, but add a couple seconds here. And you can elevate the feet. You can do a lot of different progressions with it. I have a video on this as well from a few years ago. But basically, you're building the bent arm strength, you're doing the pike push-up, but also adding that extra couple seconds of time under tension in the position that you're actually going to be pressing through. Another movement that's also going to be very helpful with your bent arm presses and of course the frog stand press to handstand is we're going to do handstand push-ups against the wall, but not all the way down, just partial. And just like we did with the pike push-ups, we're going to hold for a couple seconds in that pressing position. So this one's a little bit more advanced. Work up to it slowly. Definitely start with the pike push-ups if you don't feel confident, but it's gonna go forward, bend, so I can lift my feet for a second. That's how I know. And then I press back, forward, bend, hold for a couple seconds. Lifting your feet is extra, but if you can do it, it means you're in the right position and you maintain your balance. Again, a little bit more advanced exercise, but that's another way that you can help build strength for these bent arm presses. So that's it for today. As always, this is just my perspective on the movement. It's not the ultimate guide, the only guide you'll ever need to the crow to handstand. No, it's just a collection of ideas, a few progressions that I like to use. And if you're working on this move, hopefully you can glean, one little gem of knowledge that can help you progress in this movement and get it. And it feels, like I said, this is the first press handstand that I really learned. It feels really cool to be able to press to handstand compared to kicking and using momentum. So it's definitely a worthwhile skill to have. The bent arm strength is, for a lot of people, more accessible and easier to learn because it's a little bit less technical. You don't have to use as much of your flexibility. That could be an advantage or disadvantage, but in general, I think it's a very accessible move. I think anyone can learn this. Like anything, takes a bit of time, it takes a bit of practice, takes a little bit of patience to build the strength that you need to do the move. But other than that, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you a few ideas on how you can train the move. If you did enjoy this video, like, share, subscribe, give it one of these, thumbs up, tell other people to subscribe to my page. You can attend my workshops. You can check out my my ebooks and my courses and my instructional videos if you like my content and are interested in supporting me financially. Other than that, yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.